Aquatic facility, 7.5, that's continuing, going on. BSRC, large arena, we already funded that. Ball diamond irrigation, 200,000. Jenny?
I'm just wondering, I know we talked about doing this, but I don't know if we kind of went any farther with that. So is this like we're agreeing to do this, or?
This would be the place, if you recall, the direction was to identify one that would be kind of a trophy case kind of ball diamond. Council at the meeting identified BSRC be the preferred location. This would be the first phase of any rejuvenation of that ball field by adding underground irrigation from that perspective, and see if the turf comes back, and see if it increases the level of service. So we had promised that it would come back to council, and council would discuss whether or not they want to increase that level of service or not.
That's a big price tag.
My question is that this was brought to us by the ball diamond users, by Tyrell. Have they paid their bill yet?
That I can't answer. I don't know. I know a month ago they hadn't.
Because I'm not interested in doing this for them if they're not interested in paying their bill.
Now, I do want to highlight to council too that we do charge $5 per hour for ball fields.
I don't care how much it is.
So yeah, it's
There's
not a big
going
bill. It's certainly principal, and there is within our fee rate bylaw a proposal to increase rates for the use of the fields from that perspective. It's still unpaid.
Do we know how much it is, Riley? No, I know it's not huge. I guess the answer I needed was it's not paid. So they're asking for this, but they're refusing to pay the rental of it, so.
And I think it ponders a larger question about our fields, about the level of service the council wants to see. You know, and do we want to be specific and have varying levels of service for different ball fields or soccer fields throughout the community from that perspective?
Approximately $100 and about 8 or 9 months.
It's $100. They want a $200,000 irrigation system, and they won't pay their $100 rental fee. I'm a no.
May I ask what other groups are going to utilize this field, and is it something that then really makes us a better destination of choice for these things, with one of our fields coming closer to meeting the standards and near to the facility that the rec center? I think it's a good thing. I don't think we should be doing this for one particular group, but if we can support the associations overall with this type of enhancement to our facility, I would agree with the enhancement. If it's one group, I don't agree.
This would be used by multiple ball groups within town, both slow pitch, the various slow pitch groups that we have, as well as minor ball. So I think it would get used. Once it became a better ball field, it would be probably a higher priority. Now, again, we have to probably talk about the fee for service aspect of things, about $5 per hour. It's awfully cheap space, and whether or not we want to even continue that practice if it stays at that rate, because our administration cost is much higher than $5 per hour that we gather from that.
Well,
We did few years back increased from $2.50, I believe it was, to $5. Yes, that's the proposal in the fee bylaw.
so in the event that we have this much greater offering, I assume it will also have a much more appropriate price attached to it?
That would be the intent.
And any ball groups that are coming in and want to play in that caliber, I'm again assuming they would expect it's not $5. And that being said, I think it's time to look at the whole thing a little more reasonable.
Okay. In and out. Kelly?
If that's the direction, I'm in support, yes.
Jenny?
I'm a no.
Jamie Barton? Jamie Kinghorn?
I'm a no.
Mike?
No.
Brenda? And I'm a no, so it fails. Spray park pump replacement. Any questions? That's non-negotiable. It's gotta work. Town farm park area design and testing and the outdoor rink, these are both funded. This is part of the replacing the outdoor rink and figuring out the whole design for that little area, whether it be soccer pitches and rink, et cetera, So the park design is $100K and then $500,000 budgeted to have construction completed next year as well. Both fully funded through those home sales, so. Any questions? I can't see. It just says name one, so I don't know who's, go ahead, Jen.
What was the amount left in that fund?
800.
Yeah, just over 800.
Because I know one thing we had talked about was the disc golf, which isn't on here.
Yes, you're right. And that was about $40,000. It was committed to, but it's not on this list. I forgot to put it on the list, so my apologies.
And that's, the Kinsman's still doing
Yeah.
that project, correct?
Yeah.
So then we're 600,000. Peel back, it's the 569.
No, that's all coming from Safford, the sale of the properties funding. So that's all funded through those proceeds. That would leave you about $100,000 left over, if you do the skateboard park as well. So basically, it's to take a look.
Need you use your mic, Brenda, when you're, please, because we're live
So-
streaming.
So the skate park, our original skate park was built, I believe, in 1996, so it's starting to show its age. We also get lots of requests to have what's termed a bowl kind of facility as well. And so this project would be to engage the youth and skate park users and bring a design consultant on board to take a look at the existing site and how to integrate a more robust, I guess, and have all those components that everybody likes to use within that skateboard park, so that it maintains its presence within the community. Because there is increased maintenance starting to happen, and there are components that have had to come out because they're starting to fail. So
Okay, and so, that's good now.
and the engagement would set, these skateboard parks work really well when you do engage early and you bring the skate users together with a good design consultant. They can also they have the ability to access different grants, different grant programs, as well as it builds their foundation for fundraising as well. And so, my experience with them have been that they've gained a lot of momentum. Does the municipality still have to contribute something? Yes, but it's not usually the full amount.
I think part of it for me is seeing 3 very seasonal, limited use. We have a pump track, a skate park, and a spray park, and approximately 92.5 days of summer. Just principle. But again, I'm not familiar with these because I don't have children in those age groups to know.
It's interesting coming from a mountain community where there was a skate park. When it snowed, we saw snowboarders on it.
And are we set to use it that way?
That would be the intent. Is those kids are ingenious. They will bring their shovels. They'll create their hills. They will create their ramps, and if they have got a space to do it in, they'll make sure it lasts for a while. So they're very creative.
Thank you.
Could we look at taking the youth park bike repair station and the other one and add that as well to that revenue source,
We could,
as opposed to taking it out of current revenue?
we could. That's a choice of council.
Because I think there's still some dollars left in the fund to be able to apply to
Mhm.
that, and that would be one less
Yep.
we have to take from somewhere else.
Say that again, Kelly?
If we were to take the youth park bike repair station, and I
Yeah.
think on the next page for $7,500.
Oh, just those two.
Those
Yeah,
two,
not
the
the
bike
sunshade.
repair stations, and put that into the surplus funds
From the
piece?
800.
Correct.
Okay.
Please?
So on your sheet, you got 700K out of the 800. Then we're gonna add the two
Yeah.
bike repair stations at 75 plus the disc golf at 40K.
Yep.
All to come out of that, right?
I just have a question about where did the idea of 500,000 for the outdoor rink come from?
Basically, we took the quotes and the actual costs that we did for the youth park sport court and doubled the size. That came out with the concrete, came out to about $500,000, including boards.
It's an estimated, not tendered or quoted or
Yeah.
anything like that. It's
Yeah.
just an estimated amount to allocate to that. So if it comes under,
Well, it could, depends on the size, right?
yeah, but Okotoks has a plant.
No, I know, but even some of the other ones that are around, they're 500,000, I think is
Well, it
And-
depends on how far council wants to go. You can't put a plant over there, so that's out for sure, but.
And this is only 2 sport courts. This is not a full NHL sheet of ice. So I want to make that clear to everybody.
Right. So it's a budgeted amount, and that's what we budget, that's what we have to stick to, unless you wanna allocate more money at that time, once design's done.
I want to go back to where we're at. What is testing? Park area design and testing. What is
So-
Geotech.
just playing in the dirt a little bit to find out it's clean?
Yeah, that's the structure.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I wanted to know. Thanks.
Okay, let's go in and out, just to keep the meeting rolling here, so. Disc golf, 40K. Any no's? Skate park, 100K. Any no's? You're a no? Everybody else? Go back there, Kent, please. Any other no's? That one's in. McLaughlin Design at 100K. Any no's? McLaughlin Construction, preliminary budget of, budgeted amount of 500K for construction. Any no's? Okay, so that one's in, and disc golf is in. And then the two $7,500 repair stations come out of that 800K as well. Okay, continue on. Kent? Fountain Tire,
No, what about the sunshade?
oh, the sunshade. Sunshade at 75K.
That also seems very robust in terms of cost. Have we had any preliminary numbers anywhere?
Those are preliminary numbers that we got from estimates from potential contractors or suppliers of what they typically cost in a community of our size for a 30 by 30 sunshade,
Just a single one?
just a single one. We heard it through some members of council. I think Michael brought it forward to take a look at.
Yeah, I brought it forward, and it wasn't just for the bike park, it was that area there. We don't have any shaded area in the spray park, in the bike park, or in the playground. And it's, yeah, I saw it in Fernie, So I was like, this is a really cool idea. The dollar amount, sure, it's 75K. I'm not dismissing that as being insignificant. When Chris told me some prices, I thought, well, that's a heck of a lot of money, but I wanted it brought forward because it's a good consideration. You know, we can say we plant trees, but the trees aren't going to provide the kind of shade that kids and families need over there. So I thought maybe it was something that could be built that could be a kind of encompassing to the whole area to allow for some space that people could be shaded. So
Craig, could we look at some naming opportunities, maybe put their name on the sunshine or something like that as well over there, part of our naming and program? I mean, I'm good with the 75,000 to build it, but it would be nice if we reached out to some skate park people, I don't know who that would be, but see if they want to put their name on it. That's all.
So you know my NASCAR comment, so I'll hold that one, but I don't like it, but I don't like to have to name everything. Well, here's the thing. Yes, 75, 70, Sprung doesn't do anything for free. We all know that one. You know, the 75K, it's a lot, maybe, but it's okay to build things that are nice in High River, not just to tarp over some tent poles. You know, it's okay to spend money on making our community look good and built properly, and looks like we take pride in our community, so I'm totally okay with doing this to enhance this park. And 75K budgeted, it'll go to design and tender, and we'll see what it comes out at. Everybody's okay with it? I'm saying yes. Fountain tire berm design, that's just an obligation that we have to take care of. In my mind, bike repair station, that's already dealt with. George Lane Park Sandy Dump relocation for Councillor Kinghorn.
You want me to talk to it?
I think,
Again, this is George Lane Park is sort of our pride and joy of the community. We have people coming in from all over the world to stay at George Lane Park. I've been there numerous times, even during show and shine, where people are dumping out their trailers in the park as we're walking by, enjoying all these nice fancy cars. I just think it's long overdue to move this to a place that's more appropriate. I noticed there's no budget line item there, but I'd like administration to come up with some options of maybe where we could move it to. Some people said the north side of George Lane, or out at the out by the high school there. We actually looked at that at one time. Just a better location than in our park.
Would it make sense to develop something like that near the highway at a potential operations site?
It certainly would have the potential once we got sewer and water out there. So, but that could be a ways away too. So it all depends on how urgent this project actually is.
Maybe
And-
this would be better put into the top 5 or into the priorities list as opposed to trying to talk about it in the capital
Yeah.
budget plan.
you're right, Jamie, if it goes into the strategic planning session to talk about it. Youth park, sport court, landscaping, that's just a carry forward, so that's already. Okay, now into fleet replacement, the yearly discussions. This one's always hard for council because we are not the ones that are in the operations that are running this equipment and doing those jobs every single day. So I lean on our staff to tell us exactly what you need, not just want. So what are the highest priority items? Because it's definitely not everything. The zero turn units, I think that's been talked about enough that Uh,
We have some reconfiguration of exhaust and fans and once or twice we thought we had it fixed and then come winter and it never.
Yeah, no, we can't have our staff running equipment that's got exhaust pouring into the cab.
Having spent
It's
an
just,
hour in one of those last couple of weeks, they're not pleasant machines to operate, so
yeah.
I think that would be the highest priority on the list. And then starting at the bottom would be, the lowest priority would be the three-ton truck, cycle truck. It's getting on in years, hydraulics are giving out, and the brakes are shot. So there would be a bit of money going into it.
Phone Kinghorn, he's got hose.
Hydraulic hose would probably need some for that. I'll even give you a deal. With contingency, yeah.
Okay, so let's,
2009, like I said, it's just getting older.
right,
The next lowest would be the loader. The loader is, because we drive it everywhere, we trailer it, it actually has a significant number of miles on it. And it's got an issue with the parking brake that will need to be fixed, I think, too. So those, and it's also in 2009. So those would be the lowest two priorities on the list, and then we go up from there. I think the bucket truck is next. Again, this one is low mileage, but high hours because it idles to operate the bucket. So it's got transmission leaks, rear engine oil leaks, and so it works, it's fine, it just leaks oil everywhere. So we keep it topped up. If we keep it, we might look at replacing some seals, we have to drop the transmission to do that. So it's a fairly expensive bill on that. Then it's probably light fleet. Some of those would actually end up keeping, not salvaging, and then we send the mini trucks to auction. Some of the mini trucks we're actually having, we like them because they're versatile, but they're also hard to get parts for, so we frequently have them come to break, they're down, and we can't, there's no replacement. So we look at keeping the existing Tacoma half-tons, buying their replacements, but actually keeping the old ones and sending the mini trucks to auction. So it's kind of a domino effect. The three-quarter tons for the service trucks. Again, the years are just catching up on them. We're looking at, one of them's a 2007, the other one is. And then the scissor lift. Currently it's broken, and doesn't meet all our needs. This is primarily used within rec to replace faults and then get up to the ceiling to do the work. And it doesn't, our current one doesn't reach all the corners, implications, and
I have a question, if I may. Is that, they're not quarter-ton trucks, but three-quarter-ton trucks?
two of each.
So there's 2 half-tons and 2 three-quarter tons? The sheet says a quarter-ton truck.
Oh, correct, it should have been three-quarter.
Three-quarter, okay, thank you.
so clarity, Riley, there's 2 half-tons and 2 3/4 tons? Because I thought you mentioned replacing the Tacomas, which would be the quarter-ton trucks.
Well, they get replaced with half-tons.
Okay,
So the two Tacomas we currently have,
you would sell and
we
get,
would actually keep.
oh, I see, okay,
We would sell the mini trucks instead, because the mini trucks are actually, from a maintenance cost perspective, worse than the Tacomas. So we would then keep the Tacomas, and then we would get half-tons essentially. In a roundabout way, replacing the mini trucks.
gotcha, okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
Am I correct in then assuming that the 3-ton hook truck and the loader replacements would be then sent to be sold, or,
Correct. They would go to auction.
so that money could then be put back into purchasing? Okay.
With the exception of the two Tacomas, everything would go to auction. It's replaced.
Okay, thank you.
And in the case of the Tacomas, 2 mini trucks would go to auction.
And the 1-ton service truck, Riley? Importance? Okay, so we got two. We got a 1-ton bucket truck replacement, and then we got a 1-ton service truck. The 1-ton service truck's at a,
Sorry, my mistake. You're right. Correct, this is a replacement for one of our service trucks.
level of importance? High, low?
I'd say it's more important.
With contingency on the higher end?
We already knocked out all the really low stuff, so there's actually some stuff
Okay.
already being extended.
Okay.
I would put that ahead of the 3-ton tow truck, like if you're looking to keep the low values down, the 3-ton tow truck would be the first to come off.
Riley, could you define which of the lines is actually the scissor lift that you talked of?
Self-propelled electric.
It's on
You-
the next, oh yeah, self-propelled. It's on
And,
that.
and so you're purchasing a self-propelled electric lift for 35,000? Thank you.
Like when we auction stuff off to put it back in, how is that reflected on?
So, Riley, while Craig
It goes
is
back into this reserve.
chatting up there,
Okay.
a 3/4 ton truck is normally significantly more money than a 1/2 ton truck, yet you've got it priced here at 140 for the 3/4 and 160 for the 1/2 tons.
That's for two of them. I'm not getting that, like where you're getting 2 3/4 ton trucks at 140K.
Where it says 1/4 ton, we were told that needs to be 3/4 ton.
Correct.
Yeah,
Even worse.
even, well,
$70,000, I don't know. There's no $70,000 tags when I go into any of our dealerships right now.
no, but it seems reversed that the 3/4 ton should be more than the 1/2 ton.
Correct. Okay, let's do this, Riley. I'm gonna get you to, because we're not done today, so I would like to see clarity on these 4 trucks that you want to purchase. Come back to our next meeting. I think there's a few things that we can move forward on, one being the electric lift. Pretty important at the field house, et cetera. You can't change lights without it. Everybody okay with that one? The 2 0-2 turn units, those are little units that people spend a lot of time in, especially in the winter time with our, and we don't want units that have exhaust coming in. It's an expensive touch, but those are well-used little rigs. Everybody okay with that one? Okay. The frost hog, those are, again, extremely important when we get freeze-ups and everything in the spring. So, everybody okay with the frost hog? Okay. Go back, sorry. Okay. The 3-ton hook truck, I'm hearing Riley say low priority, so let's take that one. That's a no. The loader replacement. Riley's also saying that one's low, we can look, revisit it next year, so I'm saying no on that one. And we'll focus on these. Now, the bucket truck replacement of 135K, if it's leaking oil, that thing sits on our sidewalks and everything else doing banners and planters and everything else. I don't want it leaking oil all over the place, and if there's significant costs, I think that's a pretty important one in my mind. Everybody okay with the bucket truck? Okay. So Riley, if you can bring back tighter estimates on the 1 ton service truck, the 2 half tons, and the 2 3/4 tons. All the light fleet, please.
Just to add, I know we haven't presented here today, but next year is also pretty heavy on fleet replacements and things we're referring to.
This has been heavy every year for 10 years that I've been sitting here. This one is always, it's expensive gear that's required, so.
As an example, the sweeper was actually due for replacement this year. It's in really good shape. We deferred it out a year or two, but it's going to come back. And that's
So you're asking me don't load me up for next year? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just preparing.
Well, we'll have the same one again, so.
And I think also for everybody around the table to know is some of this heavier equipment, even though we may, if we were to put it in the budget, we may order it this year, the likelihood of getting it in 2024 is not very likely.
I would argue that right now, but we're seeing an industry that everybody's overstocked, over inventory, lots of equipment sitting around. It's a year ago, I would agree with you, but today we're predicting, at least in our organization, we're predicting about a 25% reduction in OEM business.
Okay.
So there's lots of inventory around. But looking at this, and I'll just suggest for next time around, I mean, I don't know if I'll be here, but anyways, a better way to manage this capital fleet replacement program. I don't know much about lift trucks or any of this other stuff here. So is there a way we could look at a better way where we're not making a decision on whether or not we need a 3/4 ton truck, and we let administration come forward with it? Maybe we put a top dollar value, and administration comes forward and says, this is what we want to spend on capital fleet. That makes more sense to me than trying to figure out if we need a hook truck or not.
Fair enough.
I think we can do that. I think there's also another system that we need to explore, not necessarily to adopt, but, you know, lots of communities have programs under equipment distribution rates becomes a self-funding program for fleet of its own. And that may be something that may take some time, but it's something that we should take a look at to explore, to get set up here so that when we're charging out our fleet for duties, it's being coded to the appropriate process. Because some of these light body trucks are probably utility trucks. And so they may not come out of, should probably not come out of CRIF if that's where they're going to be primarily used. They should come out of utilities. So we can bring that back, Councillor Kinghorn.
Okay, next page, Kent. Carry forward sewer water plant upgrade, carry forward 5th Street. Water online, water quality monitoring system, 125, the water, slightly important. PLC 5 replacement, those are always important. Sunshine Lake carp goldfish removal, beyond frustrating that this is happening, because it's only happening because people are putting the goldfish in. It's not bird transfers. People are dumping their goldfish into our storm ponds and creating this problem that Alberta Environment makes us deal with. 300K, for God's sakes.
Can we make sure there's an education component in that $300,000?
It would be in addition to that quote, the $300,000 is the actual quote to draw the lake down, rotenol it.
Okay.
And that's just one dose, correct me if I'm wrong, Riley?
No, I think we're budgeting for 2 doses.
2 doses?
Last time we didn't actually use the second
Michelle, can you just take that microphone? Can we get it over to Riley? We've got an extra one sitting there. There's enough. There you go.
May I ask,
Thank
what's
you.
the funding source for that?
That we're just trying to, it's either gonna have to come from reserve, CRIF, or if we can find some grant funding for it, we're searching for that right now. Now, just something from council's information around the table too, there is a little bit of a double standard when it comes to this, cause there's other lakes, Frank Lake in particular, has the same problem that they don't apply this to or enforce. And so, something for council to think about when we do go to AMA to lobby the province about, you know, a fair playing ground for everybody, and that they fund, if this is such a problem, that the province and AEP actually funds it.
Can I add to that? This is just from years ago, my experience, and I believe it's still the same, is that anything west of Highway 2 is basically under that rule. Anything on the east side of Highway 2 is not on the rule.
Not on the rule. That's exactly right.
That was the dividing line that we were given years ago, so I think that's still in play. Which is weird.
Makes no sense.
Well, it does to protect it does make sense to protect your natural waterways from, you know, the Bow River or whatever getting carp in it and goldfish in it. It does make sense on that end, but this is a enclosed storm pond. It just drives me nuts that people are doing this. It's expensive to clean it up. How extensive is the problem, Riley? Like is there 2 in there or 200,000? Like, do we know?
I can't say. There's enough for us to notice and go check. So if there was 2, we wouldn't. But I mean, you give goldfish 6 months, there'll be a bazillion in there.
Yeah.
They don't take long.
They do take over quick. Okay. Solid waste, 240 liter container replacement, 40 grand. That's just standard replacement. Go ahead, Kent. And that's where we go. Community engagement program, public education program, downtown paver replacement. That's just standard issue to have a nice downtown, has to be taken care of. Engineering, development specifications, network penetration, blah, blah, IT. And the carry forwards on software and first due. Any questions on anything on that page?
Yeah, sure, Mr. Mayor. What's millings screening? What's that?
So, from all our digs, for sewer replacements, we stockpile the millings that's mixed with overburden. It's about screening that, cleaning it up, and getting it to a process so that it's not big and chunky, that it's ground and screened properly so we can reapply it and reuse it.
Just to add, not all of it comes in as millings. Some of it's actually chunks.
Yeah.
And so it gets ground up so we can reuse it.
So good to go on those? Where does council wish to proceed next? Do we want to talk about, are there any detailed questions about operating expenses from the big spreadsheets that we sent out? We can do a presentation on operating. David's here.
Kent, if you could go to slide, we'll move ahead a little bit. Slide number 27, please, Kent. One of the last slides. Okay, good morning, council. What you have before you is the high-level budget schedule. Of course, when we come back to council, we will have much more details around operating statements for your formal approval in January of the 2024 operating and capital budget. This format is what we used last year, February, for 2023 budget approval, and also the format that we used in our last meeting on November 20th. Just a very high-level schedule. Preliminary 2024 budget, budgeted revenues. And again, we need to do this translation from PSAS to MGA. But under PSAS, we're looking at about 32.6 million budgeted revenues. You'll notice that the taxes, existing taxpayers, we mentioned this at the beginning of this presentation, we have not made any assumptions around tax increases. This is revenue neutral. All that we've done with the 14,982 is taken the 2023 budget and added new construction from last year. We have kept new construction for 2024 at an equivalent amount. Other revenues relatively consistent over last year. So budgeted revenues 32.635 million. Budgeted expenses, again under accounting standards, PSAS, 38.5 million. That gives us a budget shortfall of about 5.87 million. But again, we do all kinds of adjustments in finance. We deduct long-term debt, add back our amortization, net transfer to reserves, again about a minimum 3.2 to 3.5 million. And then we've remained silent on tax stabilization fund or use of reserves. Again, this is a question that we would move back to council. So a budget shortfall of 1.42 million, of which salary, wages, and benefits constitute 854. The differential being the 566, which is what we as administration will take back over the next 2 to 3 years to look to eliminate that with our budget leaders. That is the overall budget schedule.
If council also wants to go to the huge 315-page document of spreadsheets that Michelle and David had prepared, there is a good summary on expenses on page 2 and 3, or 3 and 4 of that document that outlines all the key sectors: salary and benefits, training, conferences, public relations, telephone, utilities, insurance, contracted services, materials, and other expenses from that perspective. And it's a great summary. It doesn't necessarily do it by service area, but it does it by segment from that perspective, and it is a good document to refer back to.
Any questions from council on the operating? Any changes in operating other than the labor, the salaries, wages, of course, that's the highest ticket. Any other significant changes in operating that affects our?
Nothing that I'm aware of besides the stuff that council's directed us over the past year to insert.
Right.
So.
Okay. Go ahead, Jamie.
This question's for David. It's just when you were commenting on the net transfers to reserves, unrestricted surplus, you said it was 3.1 to 3.5 million?
Yeah, we've modeled to 3.2.
Okay.
Earlier in the presentation, we noted a minimum of 3.5. That's going to be part of the piece that we take back over the next 2 to 3 weeks, is to get clarity. And at this point, that is designated towards our utility reserves.
Okay.
And it's consistent with last year.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor
Thanks.
Kinghorn?
Just for the public, I don't really see it on here. There's no increase on the utility fees this year, like nothing? And on the franchise fees as well for utilities, is that correct?
The budget's proposed with no utility rate increase and no increase to the franchise fees. We're actually at our legislative max, I believe, on the franchise fees.
And if, just one point of council recalls, last year you approved 0.5%, or about 45,000 in the 2023 budget, increase in utilities. But we have not carried that forward into this year for an incremental increase.
No further questions?
Should we,
Go ahead.
I guess I'm gonna ask a question, is the rest of council comfortable with that and that there's no increase in our utility fees?
Does that get discussed today or at the, when we do the fee?
Likely with the fee rate bylaw, look, you know, as it relates to utility fees, I think we've got some gaps in information on that asset management piece about the actual impact of replacing all our underground pipes and what that translates into utility fees. When you take a look at the revenues that we're generating, and especially the revenues that we're streaming from outside our boundaries, we're seeing our water utility in particular, when you take a look at the modeling, in what, 2 years' time will be over $50 million in reserves. And so when we see those types of numbers starting to project out, we need to take a serious look at our utility fees. Are they actually accurate? Accurate? Are they recouping the costs to replace the infrastructure that's underground over the longer term? And since we don't have that answer on the longer term impact of asset management on a 10-year strategy or longer, it's hard for us to really put that number to that. So we're pretty healthy, right? Let's put it that way. That's why we think we can take a break on utility rates and focus on taxation, again, this year from that
Well,
perspective.
my argument to that would be is that a lot of our staff should be charged out to those utility fees, right? That's where they work. And you're talking about a pretty significant, $854,000 here in wages. If the guys are actually in that department, maybe there should be some.
There will be some shifts of that 854,000. Approximately right now, the number that we're working with, that we've worked historically with, is about 10%. So I think it's going to be about $54,000 worth of wages that will be coming from utilities to fund that compensation framework. That being said, there are gaps in that strategy too, because there are employees around this table right now that do work in utilities, that their salaries aren't coded to that. And so that's one of the things when we work into our new GL system with the new finance system, we'll get further clarity to get our true cost accounting of what utility services actually cost. So for example, very little of Riley's time is actually coded into utilities, and that likely should be more. If that makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody around the table? We could certainly put all the council salaries into utilities. That would make our budget a little bit easier. But certainly we can have the conversation when we bring the fee rate bylaw back, whether or not council wants to increase utility rates or not, increase the metered rate or not, because there's all sorts of different components from that perspective.
Quite simply, Chris, you're telling us that we're good as far as rates go.
That's our picture this year, yes. Our utility rates, we feel are they're quite healthy. And I can't give you a clear picture on our asset picture, besides using the TCA number, of what the actual true construction costs actually would be to replace those. Because TCA number versus construction cost number through asset management is usually substantially different.
TCA is low.
Usually, because it's just based upon book value, not actual real value, and based upon construction methods. So right now for this year, we're good. you know, we are realizing $2.7 million worth of additional revenue from outside our boundaries, approximately.
And under that premise, then I'm supportive of that direction. I don't see why we'd look at increasing utility rates right now.
Okay. Continue on.
We've got some taxation models that David and Michelle can run through too as well, if you want to take a look at what 1 to 3% tax looks like. And just as a reminder, you know, we base our budget based upon revenue needs, not tax increases, what our revenue needs actually are. And so when we model things based upon revenue neutral plus new assessment. And if there's new project the council wants or new levels of service, that's where the tax increase comes in. And that would be a revenue increase, and then we translate that into what the tax increase actually would look like. David, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chris. We've included within the presentation just some refresher information on how we actually calculate the net municipal tax revenue on slide 21. And of course, there's a difference between that and gross taxation in terms of what the residents of the town will end up paying. If you look at, just draw your attention to the right-hand side of that, slide 21, how this worked in fiscal 2023, if you recall, council increased tax revenue by 2.2%. The way we model this and go backwards by the time we get to the bylaw in May of each year is to that 2.2%, we add a factor for requisitions, that is tax that we collect on others' behalf, provincial government and whatnot, and that gives us our gross taxation, okay? So for 2023, gross taxation, the amount that the residents would pay increased by 3.1%. We had an assessment value increase of about 7.3%, and what that allowed us to do is to reduce the mill rate, or the tax rate expressed using a multiplier of $1,000 per dollar of assessment. It allowed us to reduce that assessment rate, and the example I have here is for the residential rate, by about 4.2%, okay? And so when we talk about tax increase, we always want to clarify, are we talking tax revenue increase or gross taxation in terms of what the residents pay? Okay, so just to refresh your mind or your memory on that, that's fairly consistent with the bylaw that we'll come back with in May. On slide 22, if you don't mind, Kent, we've given you, using that type of formula, a range of values, net municipal tax increase from 1, 2, 3, 4%. We add back that gross up factor to get us to gross taxation. We have our assessment value increase. We anticipate about 6.2%. And then we have a decrease or increase in our actual tax rate, our mills. Chris mentioned in our meeting on November 20th the concept of scoop. So just drawing your attention to the far right-hand side. If we assume that the assessment value went up 6.2%, gross taxation, we assume 6.2%, which would generate tax revenue increase of 4.4%. That is the scoop, in that there would be no increase in tax rates themselves. And just as a reminder, over the past 3 years, because we've been able to keep our tax increase, revenue increase below, below the assessment value, over the past 2 to 3 years, we've been able to decrease that actual tax rate year over year, okay? So if you keep going down that schedule, for example, at 3%, if we focus on that column, gross taxation, we add back our requisitions, gives us 4.2%. Assessment value increase 6.2%. That, at that level, we would be able to reduce our tax rate, our mills, by 2%. Okay. The residential impact, And again, this would be based on gross taxation of 4.2% increase. The annual increase for a resident would be $106, or monthly, $8.90. Okay? Keep going down that column. Net municipal tax revenue increase, $450,000 at 3%, remembering that for each 1% change in tax revenue increase is $150,000. That would give us $450,000 that would be contributed to support operations. The budget shortfall, if you recall in the previous schedule, we calculated 1.42 million. We are going to take back 566 of that and expect to eliminate that over the next 2 to 3 weeks. So budget shortfall at this point is the 854, which is the compensation question that we initially introduced on November 20th. So how do we fund that? At 3% net municipal tax increase revenue, generating 450,000. We have a budget shortfall of 854. We would need to draw from reserves 404. That's how that model works. And we've given you perspectives of 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the full scoop at 4.4%, assuming that council would not want to increase mills, that they would want to continue to decrease mills consistent with the past 2 to 3 years. One final point at the bottom, required from reserves divided by your total stabilization, tax stabilization reserve. At a 3%, we would need to draw 10% of that tax stabilization reserve, should council wish to go with that type of increase. That concludes my comments.
Any questions, comments?
Is the 3% the preferred number at this point?
At the end of the day, I think that's up to council. That is certainly not including inflationary costs within the budget on a taxation perspective gets us behind. And so something to be aware of. But that number, of course, is up to council to determine what's preferred and what's not preferred.
If we go back a slide, so we're looking at putting, what was it, 3.1 into reserves? With, what was it, 1.4 coming out? If we can go back one slide, Kent, please. Maybe it was 2 slides. Where was it? That one, thank you. So yeah, it was 3.1 being transferred to reserves with a deficit of 1.4.
And you recall 854 of that is the compensation framework?
Right, so of the 1.7, 854 of that would,
Yeah.
if we were to
Yeah.
put less into reserve?
And as well, we still, as mentioned at the opening of the meeting, we still have work to do because we think we can get that number even further down from the operational side of things.
Sure,
So we think we can get that number a lot tighter than it actually is.
okay.
So the tax rate scenarios are just to take a look at what the impact on the average assessed household. $445,000 is your average assessed household. They would see $106 property tax increase at a 3. And so that's just to gauge, so council can feel what the comfort level actually is.
So the impact to the residential is about 3%, so however much a month, but we're also dipping into reserves, and every time we do that, it's sort of a little bit of smoke and mirrors, because if we were actually to approve the budget as is without digging into reserves, we're looking at what would be the percent to a homeowner then?
Well, And, yeah, we are hitting CRIF hard from a fleet perspective this year, but the rest of the reserves are coming from grants. So the gas tax and the LGFF, that are both, you know, agreements that are in place that we see those replenish on a regular basis. So we're using those and leverage them to our best ability to use it. We have been criticized by the province about our lack of use of the LGFF MSI in the past, so we're trying to use that more regularly, and and same with the gas tax. And so that's kind of, when you take a look at our budget, there's not a lot coming from current revenue, and then the fleet hits CRIF quite hard. But we are trying to leverage as much out of LGFF, because we know that moving forward, we're gonna see more money coming up, in our modeling shows, based upon our agreements, that we're gonna have a substantial reserve of that if we don't start spending it.
But both of those are operational in nature, aren't they? Or can they be used for capital projects, especially gas?
No, the MSI LGFF is primarily capital. There's only about $100,000 that comes directly into our operating fund. The rest is capital projects that have to be approved by the province, but then we can spend that on key capital projects. And same with the gas tax. Yeah, not operational projects. There's no aspect of the gas tax can be used on operational. So. And we should also, at some point in time, either now or early in January, talk about the ratio to commercial and residential. I'd be remiss not to mention that. Right now, we sit at about a 2.1 ratio.
You know, Chris, that one's always bothered me.
Right?
Commercial, they don't pay the tax. They pass that on to their customers. So, you know, we mess around with that a little bit, but at the end of the day, every business in this town, if they see an increase in their taxes, they're gonna pass it on to pricing through to their customers, which is really a true user pay system.
Yeah.
But that's the way it works out.
But we always have to discuss it at every budget year too.
What was the 2.1? What was that, like a differential between the two?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very similar to what Calgary was just discussing because they're nearing 5, right? But we said about 2.1. We've dropped it considerably over the last 10 years. So.
Just to clarify, Councillor Kinghorn, it's an option as a business person. I understand where you're coming from, but they could choose to take less out of their company, or they could pass it on. So there are some choices there that the business person gets to make, so.
Typically, I mean typically,
That's the ratio
No.
we've talked about, the ratio.
no, that's, there's no way our residential to commercial is. Okay, I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's 1 to 1.3.
Where's this from?
This is what's been going on the last 10 years. This isn't,
Yeah.
because when, in 2013, we were 1 to 1 residential to commercial. And we increased it for a few years there, from 1 to 1 to 1 to 1.225, then to 1 to 1.3. The 1.3 is the commercial side, and it is, we have not touched that since then. Since 2020, I think, was the last time it was discussed. So our residential commercial rate, in my mind, is too low, but
Let me check on that, because we know.
have a look at it, because there's,
But we do have to
right now,
discuss
it's
it.
only 30% higher than,
Can
definitely
you send
not
me your
double.
spreadsheet?
My spreadsheet?
Yeah.
This thing's a mess. Well, because the way the budget's presented every year changes, so it's very hard for me to keep this thing
Okay.
in order. I pinpoint specific things now, but if you look back at our residential to commercial ratio. The last conversation that council had in it, as far as increasing it or changing it, was back 2020 that I have.
Any other questions about tax rates?
You know, so the historical way that municipalities talk about their municipal tax revenue increases through a percentage number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Calgary 7, 8, you know, Okotoks talking double digits this year, but probably won't be, but it's always about the percentage, and I haven't looked at it, but I have talked to Mayor Peter Brown from Airdrie, because they focus directly on the money aspect as to how much it actually affects each household per month or annually. It's a lot easier for people to understand what that dollar value actually means to their bank accounts every month. And so you look at a 3%, well, we're at $8.90 a month, or so I think just when we present this, I'd like to really focus on what the actual dollar value means to people, rather than a percentage, because percentages can skew what the actual reality of how much it means to each household. It's like when we did the ball diamond rental from $2.50, and we put it to $5, and everybody went nuts because it was 100% increase. And they focused on that 100%, and the town's ripping all the kids off because, well, no, it was $2.50. So an hour. So you got to be careful with the percentages, and I know if you look at, I know Airdrie's was in the news the way they presented it, and I guess it was quite well done. I haven't seen it, but something to consider. But we're not making a final decision on this today, because this is going to come back in January, so we can all absorb this and see where we're at with the information that's provided to us today. So, any questions,
I don't think,
Michael?
I don't think Jamie got his answer.
Oh, sorry.
On what would the total increase, I guess, in percentage, and then to Mayor Snodgrass's point, in dollars per average, if we didn't use anything from reserves. Because the scoop column that we have, there's 194 still coming from reserves. So what would we realize if we weren't rolling anything from reserves? Right? Yeah, we didn't get that, did we? Good question. I like it. I'd like an answer too. Please and thank you.
Oh, yes, I come packing. Chris, would you like me to answer that question? I'm good to go. To cover the budget shortfall, again, compensation of $854. The net municipal tax revenue increase would need to be an equivalent amount. And so that would be about a 5.7% increase, tax revenue increase, or $17.35 per month per household. General numbers.
And that's no reserves used, correct?
No reserves used.
No
No reserve.
tax stabilization fund, nothing gets used.
No, what this would require is an increase to the tax rate, increased jury mills.
Okay. Any other questions from council? While we absorb. Okay, move on. Whatever your next.
That's all we have?
That's all we got for today? Okay.
Would you like me to repeat that? Councillor Walsh has asked me to repeat.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So we have a budget shortfall of 854, which is the compensation question. We would need to increase our net municipal tax revenue, increase our net municipal tax revenue by the equivalent amount, so that there is nothing that is required to draw from reserves. That would represent a 5.7% increase to our tax revenue increase percentage, or 1735 per residential household per month.
Go ahead.
So, because there is that big budget shortfall number that we've discussed last week, or I think it was last week, next year, then we would, I mean, essentially that number, no, it doesn't get wiped out, does it? Yeah, it does. Because then it becomes actually,
Every year is different,
Yeah.
right? Based upon operational needs, inflationary pressures, utility costs, those types of things. Every year is different. You know, going forward, you know, our hard costs that we see increases on are gonna always be our labor costs, right? And our benefit costs. So those are the things. Insurance is likely to go up, but at the same time, there's potential that it can go down. Same with utility rates too. They do fluctuate. So, you know, so every year is different. And council always has that opportunity from year to year to make adjustments how they see fit. And make those conversations about what the tax impact actually would be. So I think that answers your question, Councilor
Yeah.
Barton?
yeah, it does, thanks.
Pardon me?
Calculating your own taxes?
Oh, I'm not, no, that is not what
Are there any other questions?
I have one. Will we, once you go back to the, not the drawing board, but once you take today's feedback and extrapolate that into these
Mhm.
numbers, that will potentially change that, because what we have in front of us includes all of the operational wish lists,
Mhm.
all of the recreation, like, if we were to give yes to everything,
Yeah.
this is what this is based on.
Yeah,
So we're gonna see a
yes.
decrease potentially? Or is it solely on the proposed increase?
Looking at it, you know, when we take a look at current revenue, there was not a lot out of current revenue that was not excluded, besides, and not a lot of stuff was said no to. So, I'm just trying to digest and going through my head of all the lists that we had, what we said no to. There's only a handful of things that we said no, right? And we pushed some things out a year that's just gonna have a impact the following year from that perspective. But it is a balance, right? Because at the end of the day too, it's also balancing human capacity, and it's making sure that we have the right projects in the right white spaces and we're using it at the right time. So, you know, I think lots of communities get in a panic about, I'm gonna use the asset management, and Kelly, I'm kind of getting to your question in a roundabout way. The asset management piece as a panic button from that perspective, but, you know, you have to take that through a lens of if it's not broken, don't fix it approach sometimes, right? Because you can plan for all you want. And fleet's a great example. I've seen fleets where we bought a brand new vehicle. Guess what? 2 years later, we're trading that one in because it's a lemon. And we're keeping the vehicle that's 20 years old. Everything we do is a little bit of a gamble from that perspective, because you don't know when it's going to break or if it's going to be good. So I think what we've seen here on the capital side of things, that'll reduce the pressure on some of those reserves. It'll replenish some of them to a certain extent, because you're not going to do some projects, but most of the current revenue projects we're going to have to probably are included in the budget, and And we'll have to see where that number actually ends up at the end of this, once we go through the next round of cuts. I think we're in a good spot. I think we'll leave the tax policy decision to council from that perspective, and see where that takes us.
Okay, so next steps. We got strategic priorities starting in 15 or 10 minutes now, so I'm gonna move on. So next steps is interim budget will get, are we doing any of this? No, we're done for,
Yeah.
Interim budget will get passed at the next meeting so that we can meet our MGA obligations. We will finish this up, our budget approval in January. Coming back, we need to discuss the fleet clarification and the final budget, tax increase, use of reserves, et cetera. That'll all be done in the January. Is that cool?
Cool.
I love it, David. Okay. On that note, so we can get moving into the strategic priority session. No further questions, council? Meeting adjourned at 10:48 p.m. a.m. That would have been a long budget meeting. Feel like Okotoks.